almost every state here. All right, wonderful. Well, I will get started because I know we have a lot to cover, but if you are still just coming in, feel free to find that chat box and share where you're coming from. So today we have a wonderful webinar for you on rebuilding community. I'm Liz. I'm not the presenter, but I'm excited about this topic because my role at Teachstone is community manager. And so I am a strong believer in the power of community. And so I'm going to start us off with just a little bit of background, and then I will pass it over to our presenters who are joining us all from CREED for Education. So just a few housekeeping tips, notes. Thank you all for attending. The questions we often hear are, will there be a recording? Yes, there will. We will email out a recording to everyone who registered tomorrow. And in that link with the recording will be a certificate of attendance that you can print out, and any sort of resources that we share, any sort of slides, things like that. If you haven't yet, you can find that chat box to ask any questions. I know they're going to try and save time for some questions at the end. But you can put questions in there at any time. And periodically through the webinar, we'll be conducting a couple polls. They'll pop right up on your screen, and we'd love your input for those polls. A little bit of background for those of you who might be newer to Teachstone. Teachstone is located in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we are best known for being publishers of the CLASS tool, Classroom Assessment Scoring System. Our mission, our goal is to help every child reach their full potential by measuring and improving classroom interactions. And we work with educators in all 50 states and around the globe. I actually just looked this up because one of our presenters asked. We're in over 50 countries now, and this is actually my colleague, JJ, in one of the classrooms down in Peru. So a quick poll. Let's see. Doesn't want to work for me. Let's have you just go into the chat, and if you can, thank you. You can answer in the poll how familiar you are with CLASS. Is it that you don't really know a lot about CLASS, you're familiar with CLASS but haven't found yourself using it, you use it to collect data, or you use it both to collect data and for professional development? We're at about 60% that use it for assessment and professional development, which is wonderful. And about 15% that don't know a lot about CLASS, which is also wonderful. You won't need to know about CLASS for this webinar. So for those of you who might be newer to it, what is CLASS? CLASS stands for the Classroom Assessment Scoring System. It's a leading system for measuring and improving teaching quality by improving teacher-child interactions. And if you find yourself desiring a lot of fun research reading, you can find on our website over 200 research studies that prove how effective improving those interactions can be. And one of the things we were just talking about is how challenging having high quality interactions can be right now, but that they are at the core of great teaching, regardless of the setting. And so I think everyone, no matter whether you're in person or virtual right now, are probably finding that interactions are a little trickier. But we are trying to find all the ways to support you in making those interactions as meaningful as possible. And so my last poll for you, just to get a sense of who's joining us today, what is your role? Are you a teacher, a coach, a mentor, a leader, an observer? If none of those really describe you, feel free to put into the chat box a more accurate description. We're at about 50% teachers. That's wonderful. We were just commenting internally how we've had so many teachers joining our webinars recently, but I was wondering if now that school started, that might be harder to do. So I'm glad we have 50% teachers, 25% coaches, and lots of others. All right, well, I am going to hand it over to our presenters today. You'll be joined by Mark Greenberg. He will be facilitating a discussion with Joseph Garrix and Greenberg Schoolsby, and I am going to let them take it away.
Great, Liz, thanks. Thanks to you, Liz, and to Teachstone for partnering with CREATE for this webinar. Welcome to everyone. I'm Mark Greenberg. I'm the chair of the board of CREATE, and glad to have you join us today. We hope this will be really helpful for you. Before we begin, on behalf of all three of us today, we want to recognize that we're not only continuing to face the pandemic, but also the issues of systemic racism and how it affects the lives of children, families, and communities, early childhood specialists especially. This is a time of change in which issues of diversity and inclusion and deep understanding of systemic racism and structural racism is sweeping through our communities. As educators and parents, this awareness is critically important, I think, for supporting children and for the kind of communities we really want to create. We hope that we can create a new beginning here to fully support early childhood education for all children and begin to erase the educational disparities we all know and experience in the US. So it's critical for all of us to look at ourselves, our own unconscious biases, our conscious and our unconscious acts that have explicitly or implicitly supported systemic or structural racism, and more deeply understand how each of us can face these issues with both forthrightness, but also with kindness. We need to speak up. We need to teach ourselves and each other and our children how to identify and engage and dismantle racism and oppression within ourselves and among those around us. And may we all grow in this essential challenge. Today also, there's many other things going on in the world, and I'm in Washington State, and I see that we have many people here from Washington, Oregon, and California. We're all, there's a great deal of suffering going on in our states right now, and haven't seen the sun in over 10, 12 days. I know in California it's been weeks. And so there's lots of suffering, and I just want to recognize that it's wonderful to have people on this seminar from those places in spite of the fact of what's going on. Now, to move to the specific topic of the day, as educators, our lives have really changed forever. We've all experienced trauma in some form during this period. As early childhood centers and schools have begun to reopen, and I know some of you didn't close at all, it's estimated that somewhere around 40% of early childhood facilities stayed open during the entire time. But as most places are reopening in one form or another, it's imperative we address the effect of the pandemic experience, not only for our children and students, but the effects on us, on the adults who work with them. This webinar will discuss ideas about how centers and schools can begin to rebuild a sense of community, including exploring adult social emotional learning and needs, collaborating on strategies to build caring connections with our students, parents, and colleagues. We're interested in who has joined us today, and so if you could fill out the poll, we'd like to know sort of where you're working these days. We know it's changing quickly. Is the poll? Yes, poll showing. Okay, great. And it looks like a relatively small percentage of you are actually in face-to-face context right now. It looks like the majority are in early childhood programs in distance learning or hybrid models. We don't know how long this is going to go on, of course, but this is an important issue because uh, we have this universal experience, I think, not only in the United States. I've been speaking to people all over the world in different countries of this issue of not only distance learning, but the issue of struggling with the learning that can go on in distance learning, especially for young children. Joining us today are Deneen Parks-Goolsbee and Dr. Joe Jericks, both close associates of mine. Deneen Parks-Goolsbee began her career as a teacher, then became the assistant principal in Cleveland Heights Schools. Then she served as executive director of HumanWare, which is the social emotional learning division of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. She's now a principal coach and a social emotional resource consultant with the Cleveland Metropolitan Schools and the Warrensville Heights City Schools. And she's a board member of CREATE, the nonprofit which I chair. Welcome, Deneen.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Mark. How are you? Thank you for welcoming me. I've had the honor to serve in several positions in education. One thing about the virus that has caused the pandemic is the fact that it has been an equalizer for all of us. If we are going to conquer this, we must do it together. So our collective efficacy is important as we move forward. I'm excited about this opportunity and the ideas that we will be able to share and gain. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deneen. And I want to introduce Joe Jericks. Joe has served in the field of education for 16 years as both a classroom teacher and an administrator. He currently holds the position of social emotional learning manager with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Joe is a specialist in childhood trauma and healing-centered engagement and has provided training on these issues in numerous districts across the United States. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. I am really excited to be here today. One, to talk about this topic, but also to just engage with educators from across the country. This is a fantastic opportunity. Before the pandemic, I was in schools on a daily basis. And one thing that always resonated with me was how much our educators really do for our students and our children. And I know that this has been an extremely stressful time for our educators. They may have had to say goodbye in such a distressing manner. So when we're talking about rebuilding community, this is such a needed topic. So thank you for having me today.
Great, Joe. So Deneen, I'd like to turn to you. I'd like to begin with COVID and its effects on teachers. COVID created such abrupt changes in the lives of teachers. Can you talk about this a bit?
Yes, COVID just totally interrupted all of our lives. It came suddenly, and it's lasting for a very long time. So as educators, we were snatched from our children and families. We were snatched from our colleagues. We did not have an opportunity to continue the school year, and that in itself for educators is traumatizing. As humans, we weren't able to go out and eat in restaurants as we were used to doing. Movies were gone, plays were gone. You get the message. So this has been stressful for us, but we have learned to work with that stress, and we will continue to have that conversation today.
Great. So Deneen, now schools and centers in the U.S. are beginning to reopen in one form or another, and we just saw from the poll that the majority of teachers, even in early childhood, are going to be doing this through distance learning at least for a while. What are some of the issues that we need to address?
Of course, the initial issue is safety. People feeling safe in the environments that they are being asked to man, whether they are face-to-face or they are doing virtual learning. They have to address the changes in their educational approach. I know that people are concerned about whether or not our children are getting the level of education that they would get face-to-face when they are doing this virtually. There in some places, devices are an issue. So just basically worrying about the quality of education that our young people are receiving and making sure that they are all receiving education at the same level. As referenced before, you know that it is the relationships between the adults in a school or a center that make the difference in a child's education. So even the adjustment of the staff not being together wholly is a challenge. So staffs are learning ways that they can talk to one another and they can plan together to make sure that students are receiving the best education. So as a staff, they are working to establish normalcy in this unnormal place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. How do we ensure that? How do we ensure that, one of the really important issues, especially the three of us have been in the Zoom environment for a long time, and of course, all the people that are joining us today. But as we begin to return, how do we ensure that everyone is seen and respected and feels valued as a member of the school community? This is really, I think, a critical issue. And I'm wondering what are some of the simple things we could do? And I'm interested in what people who are listening today have been doing to make sure that their colleagues are seen and respected and valued. I wondered if we could share with each other some of the ideas of teachers and staff that are listening to the webinar today. We don't have the answers to all these questions. In fact, they are locally derived, of course. But I'm wondering what are some of the things that you might have done, and if you could chat them out, to make sure that people are seen, respected, felt to be of value as we begin to work together again.
Yes, so we'll be waiting for your chat responses. How do we make each other seem and feel, not seem, but how do we make each other feel respected and valued? What is something we can do in this virtual world? Okay, community of practice, validating the feelings and concerns, listening to each other, genuine, enthusiastic listening, being kind, taking time with each other, yes, being present, valuing each other's voices. Yes. A lot of good answers in here, Mark.
Well, there's a lot to be learned here.
The genius
I would say that one of the predominant things here is listening, and that's that we all want to be seen, and being seen really means being really deeply listened to. And
yes.
I hope that the people are able to extend this to parents right now, because while the staffs we're all struggling, also the parents that we're working with are really struggling for a whole variety of reasons. And I don't know how well people have been able to do this, but the ability to just actively listen to the concerns of parents is, I think, a really important issue, because when parents feel a connection to their early childhood centers or K-3 schools, they'll be more willing to be partners in the distance learning process.
Yes.
I hope, I believe, Liz, that the chat will be saved. Is that right?
Yes, we'll be able to save it.
Because I want to take time to really read through this chat as well. It's going so fast because people have really participated in how they do, how they're doing this. And this is the most important thing, is how do we connect with each other? What our personal relationships are like now. So Deneen, reflecting on your time as a principal, if you were a principal or a director of an early childhood center now, what would you consider doing to reassure teachers and parents?
Transparency and inclusion, informing and listening. So when you are transparent with people, they respect that. They like to know what's happening, what they can expect, and how they can assist. So including them in your decision making is paramount. We need to make sure that we are including all entities of our environment in the decision making as we move forward. When we are informing people, we're letting them know what the CDC is saying, what our particular states or countries are saying about how we need to remain safe. So those things they need to be made aware of so that they know exactly the ramifications that we are dealing with as educators. And listening, of course, is critical. We have to listen to their concerns. We have to listen to the things they're worried about so that we can work together to come to resolution. So those 6 words would be my guiding force: transparency and inclusion, informing and listening.
You know, I think listening, just to go back to this again for a moment, I think is really important because none of us have the answers.
Right.
This is new territory for all of us. And the issue is not to feel that we can give parents answers to the questions they have, because oftentimes we don't know what the answer is, to be honest, and we should be honest with them. We're in this with them together in this struggle of defining how we can do this work well.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times maybe people are a little worried to connect with parents because they don't have the answers, and yet there's no need to have answers here. The issue is just to connect, to listen, to be empathic, as many people said in the chat, to the concerns people have. And by doing that, they know that you really care. And that's the important thing here is feeling that you care about their concerns, even when we don't know maybe what to do.
Right.
Is part of what makes us join together as a community.
Yes.
I love what Lisa Goldberg just said. She said, take time to breathe and laugh together and slow down.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah.
We often don't leave time for that, and it's important.
So Joe, if I can turn to you for a minute, let's talk a little bit about the trauma and the different degree and types of trauma that teachers and parents and students have experienced, and how we might help, how this might help us understand what we need to consider as we reopen.
Yeah, definitely, Mark. You know, when we think about trauma, probably many different either visuals or words pop into your mind. So I think it would be a benefit to all if we bring uniformity to the lens that we're looking at trauma through for today's topic. And if we just frame trauma as loss, you know, I'm sure that there are participants today who have lost maybe loved ones to COVID-19. So there's the physical loss. I'm sure we all lost relationships due to quarantine that. So if we're looking at trauma through the sense of loss, I think that would help to bring a unifying meaning to what we're looking at today. And it's safe to say that we've all experienced some form of trauma during this pandemic. So as we reconnect, it's imperative that we take the time to acknowledge that life as we know it really may be changed forever, right? And we have to take the time to look at how these changes could impact our schools. This requires us really to reflect on how these recent experiences altered our perceptions and affected our actions. And as you return to your place of employment, in one form or another, whether it's a hybrid, whether you are just straight virtual, whether you are back in brick or mortar setting, we're going to do another poll, and I really want you to just reflect what word resonates with you as we embark going back to work in one form or another. So you can see that the poll is up now. So what word really resonates with you and how you're feeling? I'm going to give you a little bit of time to answer this in the poll. And so as the answers are coming in, I'm looking at them right now, there is really a blend of all of these feelings and what we would also classify as uncomfortable feelings. I'm concerned, I'm anxious. Few are excited, right? This is, if we look at this from we are pioneering education right now, we're part of that process. This has never been done before. And so we're on the front lines of that. So as the poll ends, 44% are feeling everything. And that really can be overwhelming. And then, you can see anxious, concerned, excited, comfortable. And I just want to acknowledge that whether you have comfortable feelings, whether you have uncomfortable feelings, all feelings are okay. We're going to feel that. For some of you, I really think that you might have a sinking feeling when you think about what your educational community looked like last year, right? As opposed to what it looked like this year. You may have thoughts of frustration, confusion, grief, because there was loss in the process. Questions may be swirling around in your head, centered around how on earth are we ever going to get this back to normal? And one thing that I am really convinced throughout this entire pandemic and all other ongoings right now is that our educators are some of the nation's most resilient and adaptable professionals. I truly at my heart believe that. And our educators realize that it is essential that we focus on rebuilding relationships and supporting social emotional learning in order to create welcoming environments and a sense of safety for our students and our families, right? The unknown can oftentimes bring, just as you highlighted, feelings of anxiety. And if you're feeling that, it's probably safe to assume that our children are feeling that as well. So when we're looking at what entails safety, right? What entails the sense of familiarity? We're really looking at building a culture of empathy, right? And we not only need to strengthen our relationships in the classroom, but we really need to nurture caring relationships across schools for both children and educators. And as Mark mentioned earlier, he mentioned something called healing center engagement. And this is really the work of Dr. Sean Ginwright, who is really the mover and shaker of this. And when we're looking at healing center engagement, you can see the definition right on your screen. I'm going to go ahead and read it. It views individuals exposed to trauma as agents in the creation of their own well-being rather than victims of the traumatic events suffered, right? And so for me, when we're looking at the difference between healing-centered and trauma-informed, I sometimes sum it up just like this, right? Trauma-informed lends itself to, I need to reduce the symptoms that I see or manifestation of trauma, right? So I need to manage those triggering responses. And even if we manage those triggering responses, it doesn't always necessarily translate into well-being, which healing center engagement really focuses on with 3 pillars, with empathy, culture of empathy, with hope, and with self-reflection. And it really moves towards what you see on your screen, which are, we can coin asset-driven strategies. So when we're looking at what deficit-based supports mean, I don't want you to maybe bristle and kind of get a raw feeling around this, right? Because when we're looking at trauma, and you see that first point, it says, view students from a lens of harm. What this really truly is meaning is the harm comes in the things that have happened to children. So we're looking at students from what has happened to them. And if we're not careful, if we only see children as what has happened to them, it does a couple of things. It lowers expectations of what they can achieve. It doesn't bode the question of how can we address well-being with them, right? Because you can see we're just dwelling on those effects of trauma and simply seeking to reduce those symptomatic manifestations of what trauma is. And if we're looking to move towards asset-driven strategies, we're not dismissing what has happened to the child, right? But we're building upon what has happened and moving with skills and assets and talents that each and every one of our children have, right? Some that they may never even know in themselves that they have. And we're moving towards a realm of what we want to be able to achieve with that child, right? And this is hard work, because when we're talking about empathy and building a culture of empathy, it requires different components. One of those components being a realm of emotional literacy, being able to, if I understand how you're feeling, then I first must understand how I'm feeling, being able to name and classify those emotions. So when we're looking at these caring and nurturing environments for both children, we also have to be inclusive of our educators. So it's going to be interesting to witness the various designs that emerge from schools, from centers, as plans unfold. And recognizing our collective talents and nurturing our relationships can certainly lead us to the resolution, right? And so if we successfully focus on connection and engagement as the cornerstones of the return to school, right, we'll be able to then turn our attention to engagement and learning and the school success.
So well said, Joe. And it reminds me of a story some of you might know, but many of you don't. I'm one of the developers of the PATHS curriculum used in many early childhood centers around the world, Head Starts, public, private preschools, et cetera. And it's a story about a family in rural Ohio that had twin daughters, and their father passed away unexpectedly. And of course, everyone was very concerned about these 2 girls. And this is where the role of emotional literacy is so important. The priest went to the house of the family and wanted to engage the 2 girls in discussions about, how they were feeling about their the loss of their father, of course, it was a very difficult time. And when he asked the children how they felt, they said, oh, we learned about this in school. We have the PATHS curriculum, and we have feeling phases, and we know how we feel. So the kids went back to school about a week later, and the first thing that the teacher asked them to do was to show the faces for how they were feeling. And one child put sad, one twin, and the other twin put nobody's business. They were both able to articulate exactly how they were feeling about both the trauma and how they wanted people to respond to them. So this ability to articulate their emotions, and I'm sure just like the teachers on and other participants on this webinar today who had multiple emotions felt all the above, that it's the same for children. Children are feeling a lot of things right now, including anxiety and fear and sadness, a sense of loss. But also now that they come online, they're feeling excitement to see their teachers and other friends. And probably also not very long into the teaching you're trying to do, they're feeling maybe a little bored and tired. And so there's lots of emotions going on, and the ability to help children put into words and reflect on these emotions is really a key issue for children being seen during this time. Another aspect of healing-centered engagement is hope. And Deneen, I wonder if you might just talk with us a little bit about the issue of hope right now.
Yes, Mark, hope is something that we really need to focus on. In this age of we don't know what's happening next, and as educators, we are used to knowing the answer or being able to find the answer. So the fact that this thing keeps spiraling and we don't know where it's going to end, hope becomes a thing that we need to concentrate and focus on, making sure that we are in that area of mindset. So as we go through, our children need to learn, if you have a target that you want to hit and there's something that you want to do, if that doesn't happen, so what's next? Hope doesn't die because things change. Hope is born out of the challenges that we face. So as we continue to move forward and we think about the future, we need to teach our children how to focus on what the future will look like, even if we run into obstacles. So teaching them resiliency, teaching them that even though that may not have happened, there's another way we could have done this, and build that hope that way. I think that's important. I saw that someone said that we need to take the time as the adults on the staff to make sure that we are hopeful, that we understand that things are coming this way, but we are hopeful that we will conquer it together, that we will help our students and families conquer this together. And that comes through relationship building on the staff, that comes from conversations on the staff, making sure each person has an opportunity to express how they are feeling. So hope should be up around our facilities, making sure it's always something that we are looking at as we go through our daily routines.
Great, thank you, thank you. At Create, we've been thinking deeply about rebuilding our communities on return, and we've consulted with teachers, early childhood educators, and leaders to listen to their voices. And as a result, we've developed both an in-person and an interactive online train-the-trainer model for what we think is an innovative one-day in-service to support centers and schools as they come back together as communities. While we can discuss a little bit of it today, this is a much longer process, a day-long process. We know that return to school, either virtually or in person, is a big challenge for everyone. But with principals, directors, teachers, staff working together to prepare themselves and their students, we're providing hope for the broader community, we think. This slide I'm going to put up now shows the next training that we'll be doing. These are train-the-trainer trainings. It'll be done by Deneen and Joe and Dorothy Morelli, who is the CEO of Create, and couldn't join us today. And you can see the registration for this, which we'll also put in the chat. And this is a train the trainer model in which we have two-hour trainings with a curriculum and PowerPoints. The first 2-hour training is really about us as adults and how we've coped, how we've managed our stresses, and what kind of community we want to rebuild, both in terms of the pandemic, but also the other issues I discussed at the beginning around systemic and structural racism. The second 2 hours is about our children, and it's really focused on what Joe mostly talked about, which is focusing on healing-centered engagement. How do we build the issues of empathy, reflection, and hope? What do we do ourselves, as well as what we do with children that can build those capacities? This training is for individuals who are thinking about how they can serve their schools or their centers or their districts. And we train them in this a 4-hour sequence and how to do that work. And they then go to their communities and do the training directly with their staffs. CREATE's also the home of the CARE Professional Development Program. And CARE is a program developed to build mindfulness, awareness, and social emotional abilities in teachers. It's developed by Tish Jennings, Krista Turksman, and Richard Brown, and CREATE is the home of this training. And in fact, the next webinar that CREATE is doing together with Teachstone will be about CARE and will feature Krista Turksma. Interestingly, the class has been used as one of the research methods in the study of CARE in a very large study in New York City, where teachers were randomized to get CARE or to not get CARE in elementary schools in the Bronx. 226 teachers were involved. One of the outcomes that was shown as a result of the CARE work was that teachers showed more productivity and better emotional environment on the observations of the class, I'm sorry. For more information on all of this work, you can go to our website, createforeducation.org, that discusses rebuilding our communities, CARE, and other programs that we provide. CREATE is really a nonprofit focused on how to systemically build quality social emotional learning for both children and for adults. So with that, I think it might be good to move to questions. We're really interested in questions that people have and or concerns that they have, and be glad to try to respond to them. I think I said earlier that there aren't often answers right now to many questions, but we'll try our best. So Maria asked, how can we assure families that things for their children, that they'll be safe at school? And would Deneen, or you or Joe like to try to answer that one?
I think, Mark, the consistency of routine that they see when they come in on a daily basis. If they consistently see that temperatures are taken, sanitizers available, the steps that are recommended, that helps. Because when you see that the routine is in place, you know that this is happening daily, and just checking in, being available to them if they have questions about safety issues.
Yeah, and I would definitely echo what Deneen said in setting those routines, right? Because we know that one of the major triggering occurrences for manifestations of trauma is the unknown, is unpredictability. So there is the physical well-being, right? The temperature checks, the social distancing, and it has to be communicated home in an intentional manner as well. And then also there's the emotional well-being. So as an educator, I'm doing morning check-ins, taking temperature, not physical temperature, but emotional temperature gauging. And that's how we're starting our day, so that we're putting our emotions, our feelings out there, we're acknowledging them, and then we're moving on. And also, communicating routine of whether it's virtual or an online or a brick and mortar setting to caretakers.
Great. Sherry has a question. Yesterday in my school, my 10-year-old grandson was asked by a classmate to help her open her lunchbox. My grandson said no. I asked why he wouldn't help. He said because the teacher has told him not to touch other people's things. He's quite a rule follower, often the case at that age. And I understand his thinking process, but it made me sad and scared about what we are really doing to our children.
Yes, that is an adjustment for our children because we're used to being able to be social with one another. So just the continuous teaching them that this is the world we live in now, and what he could do to help and to raise his hand and ask the teacher to come and help the young lady or his classmate would be helpful. But yes, I agree. This is a new world that they are having to grow up in. And as we as adults are struggling, our children are struggling too.
Yeah, and I think, this is a perfect example of a great problem-solving situation. So any conflict or situation like this would be good to be shared with the teacher, because it would be very interesting for the teacher to lead a very short discussion with the kids about what you could do in the situation. So it's already happened, but something like this will probably happen again. And this is something we do, of course, in many social emotional learning curriculums, including the past curriculum, is we have a problem box where either kids can draw problems if they're younger, or teachers can even write the problem and put it in the box. And then this is pulled out of the box later, and children can role play the situation, talk about how both people feel in that situation, and kids can generate ideas about what could be done. And of course, sometimes with 3 to 7 year olds, they don't generate very good solutions. The teacher can also add in his or her solutions. But these are problems to be solved. And I think sharing with the teacher this kind of concern hopefully would lead the teacher to try to do a problem-solving discussion with the kids about contexts like this. Someone's just asked, what new ideas can I implement with teachers to help connect the community?
I just have always believed that communicating with your community and your parents about what's happening in the school and the steps you're taking is beneficial. The community likes to know where they can be supportive. So if there are ways that they can support, there are ways to send out newsletters or communications that let them know some of the needs you may have or some of the appreciations that you have for what they have done. So I think open communication with your community would be helpful.
One of the things that people are trying to do these days on Zoom is to do more than just provide information, but to have what might be called a coffee time or something like that. And it's just a time where staff might get on in which there's not a real agenda except to share with each other. And I know that many times these days, Zoom is used, we tire on Zoom, we get zoomed out. We don't want to stay on too long. More than an hour often is too much for adults, let alone for kids. But I think having some time, which is just some open sharing time from a distance, could be really helpful, just to know what people are doing, what they're binging on these days, what's happening with their children and grandchildren, how are they having fun, what are they doing to exercise, etc. Just sharing with each other as a way of building bonds at this time. And see, there's an interesting chat going on over here about, started by Linda, about my fear as an educator going back, as I'll no longer be able to provide the nurturing that some of my babies are longing for. That's really hard to have distance. And children need hugging and they need touching. And that's a real loss. I'm wondering how people are dealing with this. How are people that are back face to face dealing with the issue of what are the alternatives they're using? if they feel they're not able to hug the children. Wonder if people might share some ideas with each other. Air high fives. That's a nice one. What other ideas do people have? Air hugs. Elbow bumps, of course. Blowing kisses. Sign language, very nice. All the creative ways we can do this from a distance. Waves. And some people are hugging. Some people are doing hugging. And I think this is a thing that both schools and teachers and parents need to discuss and decide on. Touchless greetings. So lots of creative ways of doing this from a distance while being in a brick and mortar face-to-face. So yes, with really young children, the idea of protective smocks or coverings, because of course children have to be carried and held, especially when they're young. Lisa just wrote a self-hug. Pass it on to the person you want to hug by telling them to give themselves a hug virtually for you. Really sweet idea. Well, I'm learning a lot. I hope other people are learning a lot too. Oh, Michelle Foley just asked a great question. How do you console a student crying from separation anxiety while distancing? Well, that's a very difficult question. I think one of the things you can do is to give them these virtual hugs. Another thing to do is to do some very deep breathing with them. And of course, we know that oftentimes distraction can help also. So I wonder what other ideas people have. Transition photo of the family. So parents bring a picture that the child can have. Excellent idea. Some schools I know have done the possibility of having the parents on doing FaceTime with the kids. So the parents and the kids can see each other even though the parent isn't there. Mindfulness techniques, of course, is one thing that could be used. If the child is really upset, though, they're probably not going to try them, but at least some deep breaths to begin with might be a good idea, or to know what their favorite video is and to put it on to settle them down for a few minutes. Lots and lots of ways to do this. You can see in the hugging a stuffed animal. That's a beautiful way to think about this. And of course, having children bring their transition objects to school, if they're sanitized, of course, is one way to also help all children during this time, is to let them have their special objects. Elizabeth says, have a recording of parents' voices saying, you are safe, you are strong, we'll see you at the end of the day. One of the things that younger children have a hard time doing is, quote, carrying their parents around in their head, being able to repeat to themselves over and over, I'm going to be okay. And so hearing the voice of their parent, for some children actually could be very helpful. For others, you know, temperament, every child has a different temperament. For some children, this may actually increase the separation anxiety. So knowing the parent and the child are very important to what strategies you might use to help the children cope. Grace just said in New Mexico, children under 3 are not required to wear masks. So this, of course, is going to vary very much by place. I've been working with people in the Netherlands where COVID has been very low, and teachers are hugging children. They're back to a sort of almost what you'd call a normal school. So very different places. Well, Deneen and Joe, we don't have to do much of the work because our participants have so many amazing ideas about how to do this. I can't wait to really spend time with the chat, because people have been struggling with this and coming up with really fantastic ideas.
The genius is definitely in the room. I can't wait to read it either. There's so many. I saw one where they had a button of the staff smiling so that the children could see that button and know what the teachers looked like when they were smiling if they had the mask on all the time. I thought that was cute too.
That's right. And feeling faces are another example of that, where everybody can be having a loop around their neck with the feeling face of how they're feeling, or maybe multiple faces if they're feeling multiple things. This also begins to start conversations about how people are doing, what their internal state of mind is, and allows children to know that they can share their own feelings even when they're quite difficult.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little heart pillow that they carry in their pocket, and I guess before they leave home, the parent hugs the heart pillow. So when they're feeling sad, they can take it out and think about their parent. I like that too.
Well, great. I think that's pretty much all the time we've had for questions. We're really glad to be with you today from Create and to share some of our ideas about how to rebuild communities. But as I hoped, this is an incredibly active group of people that are connected to Teachstone, and you're all teaching each other as well as us great ideas on how to handle these very, very difficult situations. So we really appreciate you joining us today. And now I'm going to hand it back to Liz.
Thank you. Let's share my screen again. I really enjoyed reading all those things. I was saying I come at this as a previous teacher myself, but also as a parent of a 5- and 7-year-old. And so thinking about sort of what they're experiencing in their programs and some of the ideas I can pass on. So thank you to everyone's wonderful ideas. I do want to take just the last 5 minutes that we have here and share some things coming up in the future. I know there were lots of questions that came through. People were wondering about the slides and if they could have access to them, and those couple of upcoming dates that Mark shared. And so I'll make sure that in the email that goes out tomorrow, where there's the landing page that has the recording and the certificate of attendance, that we also share where you can learn more and anything that you might have missed. No need to take notes. In addition, I'll share out these 2 upcoming webinars that you might be interested in. The one at the bottom, September 30th, you mentioned the Nurturing Educator Resilience in Times of Crisis. And then if you are coming from a Head Start program, we have a webinar tomorrow at noon specifically about class professional development for Head Start. And the other thing I would love and always give a shout out to is our class learning community. As you can see in our Zoom chat with everybody's amazing ideas and sharing, that's what we hope for in the class learning community as well. People ask questions and share ideas. It's been a really sort of wonderful place for people to get ideas. I think as anyone in education, you have that like, all these little tricks in your pocket, and now that it feels like your pockets have been sort of emptied of all the normal tricks, and we need to get answers to new questions like, how do you do a morning greeting if you can't do your normal high fives and hugs? And so those are the kind of questions people are asking and finding answers to, and we invite anyone to join. It's free. You don't need to be a class observer or anything like that. Anyone can join the class learning community. I encourage you. If you have specific class-related questions about these times, we have a number of downloadable resources available now, both for conducting class observations in in-person or virtual settings, but also what effective interactions in either a socially distant or physically distant classroom and same within a virtual classroom. And so there's lots of wonderful ideas. Though, as I was watching everyone submit their, like, how you could give an alternative to a hug, I was picturing more resources that we need to put out. So you might see your suggestions on a future printable or blog post. And lots more solutions you can look into. We're trying to be responsive to the needs we hear you all sharing. We have on-demand video coaching that we can offer, and we also have trainings for supporting interactions in a socially distanced or virtual classroom. And a couple months ago, we had a whole series on trauma-informed care. It's certainly something, like Joe was saying, that we really know that every student is likely going to be returning with some level of struggle, and certainly some much more so than others. And so I highly recommend the free webinar series. They're all available on demand now, but we also have an online course. All the experts that are in that webinar series came as subject matter experts to make a 6-module course on trauma-informed care and teaching. So take a look at that. And there's lots of things, but I will just say we'll email out everybody those recordings and all of those resources tomorrow. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you to our presenters today. That was wonderful and such a good conversation. And we hope you reach out if there's more that Teachstone can do. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much.